So recently I put together a video looking at bad or questionable WCW gimmicks, and when putting that video together I also listed out some of the better gimmicks that WCW presented. We don't want to be negative all the time, so today we're going to take a look at some gimmicks and characters in WCW that I thought were actually good. It's a bit tough too, because when things were really taking off for the company, the more elaborate gimmicks were more or less pushed away. Guys being exaggerated versions of themselves proved to be much more successful than being outlandish cartoon characters or heroes and villains you'd find in comic books. But over the company's entire history, there were good and successful ideas that captivated audiences, and even if some gimmicks were pretty plain or standard, there were enough nuances added that only the guy portraying the character could really pull off. Let's take a look at some of my favourite gimmicks and characters in WCW, and I'll try my best to explain why I enjoyed them. We're only going to look at 10 today, and as always, it's all personal opinion here. Seeing the loud and fun-loving Sting morph into the dark and mysterious Crow Sting was a real sign of the times in WCW. Sting's character completely changed when he felt his peers in WCW had turned their backs on him in 1996, and fans would have to guess if Sting was a WCW guy or if Sting was part of the NWO. He would test the loyalties of other WCW wrestlers to see if they stood by him or not. He would watch what was going on from the rafters. His intentions remained shrouded in mystery due to the fact that he would sometimes attack WCW guys, and he also joined the original black and white NWO at one point. But when the Stinger made his intentions clear without speaking a word that he wanted Hollywood Hogan in the ring, he became WCW's top babyface all over again. There's a huge risk factor here that I think many of us take for granted. Sting could have easily kept being that same babyface we all knew and loved throughout the late 80s and early to mid 90s, and I don't think fan support would have even wavered. Changing the Stinger to something much more mysterious could have been a disaster for both WCW and Steve Borden himself, because his original character was already extremely successful. But even though the character itself was dark and brooding, the Stinger became the light that fought against the NWO. Fans couldn't get enough. Watch an episode of Nitro where Sting comes down from the rafters to fight Hogan in the New World Order, and fans just couldn't sit down. The gimmick worked incredibly well. Sting would have a lot of success as the Vigilante, and while character evolutions of the Vigilante were also well received, I don't think anything can beat the original Crow Sting in 1996 and 1997. I know this is common knowledge now, but someone's going to point it out in the comments. So it was Scott Hall who came up with this new Sting character. Scott watched the Crow movie starring Brandon Lee, and he thought Sting could become an excellent anti-hero against the NWO. This is one we didn't get to see completely play out, and according to Chris Jericho, this idea was going to evolve into a full-blown faction of new, younger horsemen. But still, what we did get to see on TV gives us an idea of where things were headed. Brian Pillman was an unstable member of the Four Horsemen, but the faction put up with Brian because he was so good in the ring. Things tipped over when the Horsemen decided to join forces with the Dungeon of Doom in order to take care of Hulk Hogan. Pillman would still berate Kevin Sullivan while acting like he lost his mind, and Pillman struggled to set his differences aside in order to help his Horseman teammates in another alliance to end Hulkamania. On one particular episode of Nitro, Arn Anderson had had enough and he slapped Brian across the face while telling Pillman he had to fall in line. Pillman still struggled to keep any kind of peace with Kevin Sullivan, so the famous respect match took place where the object of the bout was to make your opponent say, "I respect you." Pillman grabbed the mic without much physicality at all taking place. He said, "I respect you, Booker Man," and he walked away from the ring, only to show up in ECW where he would refer to himself on occasion as the Rogue Horseman. Brian's business dealings around this time still to this day haven't been made clear. The general consensus is that Brian would return to WCW shortly after his ECW stint, and indeed he did make another Nitro appearance while still working ECW dates, but Pillman would ultimately sign with WWF and the Rogue Horseman angle completely stopped. It was reported that Pillman would lead a new Horseman faction, and names that were rumoured included Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho. Jericho also confirmed this on his podcast, or at least he said Brian told him about it, but it didn't happen due to Brian leaving WCW for good. The Rogue Horseman thing, though, in my opinion, was a breath of fresh air to the already well-established Four Horsemen faction, and watching Pillman promos during this short time frame is still very fascinating. Dusty Rhodes' character, the American Dream, represented the common man. In a business where viewers are made to believe that you have to be a giant, over-the-top cartoon character and you have to be an extraordinary specimen to gain success, Dusty Rhodes became extraordinary for being, well, ordinary in a way. Make no mistake about it though, it takes someone special to cut promos the way Dusty Rhodes could cut a promo, and no one could cut a promo like Dusty Rhodes. But the idea behind the Rhodes character was that he was simply a son of a plumber who had the American dream. He was blue collar through and through, and he had a goal in life to be the world champion. The Four Horsemen were everything Dusty was not. The Horsemen were all about expensive suits, expensive cars, luxury, women, and doing anything and everything necessary to keep people down so they stayed on top. The Horsemen then would be able to amplify the qualities of Dusty Rhodes as a character due to their contrast in lifestyles, and in turn, fans at home could identify more easily with Dream because not everyone could have what the Horsemen had. The common man was very relatable for a lot of people, and no one could have pulled it off quite as well as Dusty Rhodes. When Scott Steiner became Big Poppa Pump, it was almost like the leash was taken off and he was free to do and say whatever he wanted. Steiner was just as vocal as any other tag team wrestler while in the Steiners, as in he would talk when he had to, more or less, but Big Poppa Pump would go on to become so well known thanks to the more insane promos he had cut in the best way possible. While Scott's look drastically changed just one night after ditching brother Rick in favour of the NWO, it did take a little longer for Scott to truly find his voice and work out exactly what his character would be as a single superstar. But when Scott finally did find that character, there was no turning back, and fans would grow to love the big bad booty daddy because the man just didn't have a filter. Scott would become obsessed with his freaks and his peaks. Big Poppa Pump felt he was better than everyone else because of his body. He would tell everyone that he was the genetic freak and there wasn't a man on the entire planet who could stop the big bad booty daddy. This version of Scotty Steiner particularly stood out during the dying days of WCW, even though there was a lot of nonsense going on in the company, and from a creative aspect the company had seemingly topped out. Big Poppa Pump would remain an entertaining fixture on WCW programming. This also means though that less people saw what many consider his best days as a solo competitor. For me, it was a tough pill to swallow when the Steiners broke up, but no one can deny the success Steiner had as Big Poppa Pump. We all know that Ric Flair was not the original Nature Boy, but without a doubt, he's the most famous. Sometimes it's hard to separate Flair from the gimmick because it's a well-known fact that Flair would live the gimmick when the cameras were off, and sometimes it can take a moment to pull Flair out of that character and try to see it for what it is, but simply put, the Nature Boy is a playboy. If we look at the definition for playboy in the Oxford Dictionary, it says a wealthy man who spends his time enjoying himself, especially one who behaves irresponsibly or has many casual sexual relationships. So let's break that down and rebuild it in the image of Nature Boy Ric Flair. First, the wealth. Ric Flair couldn't and wouldn't stop talking about his expensive cars, his custom-made suits and robes, the shoes he wore on his feet, the Rolex watch he wore on his wrist. The Nature Boy character didn't wrestle for money because he was already very wealthy. Next, the definition of a playboy states that a playboy is a man who spends his time enjoying himself. And this is another thing that Flair wouldn't stop talking about. Hitting the town after a show and partying all night long was a regular occurrence for the Nature Boy, and if the guy interviewing Rick was lucky enough, they'd get invited to paint the town red with Slick Rick after the show. Behaving irresponsibly was another trait of the Nature Boy. You don't become the dirtiest player in the game by being responsible, and Rick also let his own irresponsibilities spread to the other Horsemen in his faction, as in Rick could do whatever he wanted and the Horsemen would be there to back him up no matter how wrong Rick could be. And then you have the sexual misadventures of the Nature Boy that I don't think I need to detail, but you know the drill. Space Mountain, oldest ride, longest line. Imagine putting Ric Flair in any other gimmick and it becomes laughable. Slick Rick made the Nature Boy work because he became the Nature Boy. He wasn't the first, but he'll always be the most well remembered. This is going to have yours split, and I could be called a hypocrite here because I give Glacier so much shit in Reliving the War, but I'm okay with that because Mortis just looked a million times cooler in my opinion. Still though, I know some people dislike everything in the Blood Runs Cold storyline, and that's fine too. James Vandenberg was a collector of curious oddities going back to his days in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and one of these strange and unusual oddities he found on his travels was Mortis. Vandenberg said Mortis started off as a pro wrestler, but then he began competing in underground fights in places such as Malaysia, Singapore, and in the capital of Taiwan, Taipei. So when Vandenberg saw Mortis in one of these underground fights, he knew he had to add him to his collection. Vandenberg would call Mortis the master of forbidden blood sports during Mortis's debut entrance on Nitro. Mortis deviated away from your usual dark and mysterious wrestler that wore a mask by acting a lot more human in the ring. It probably wasn't an intentional trait, but it's something I liked about the character. He didn't try to be overly sinister, and he didn't try to add horror gimmicks to his matches. Instead, he would show off some innovative wrestling moves while wearing what I thought was some awesome ring attire, and I think that's why I like the character so much. He wasn't trying to be all terrifying when the bell rung. Mortis's main mission in WCW upon the character's debut was to take out Glacier. The collector Vandenberg wanted to own Glacier's prized helmet, and a portion of their rivalry was centered around Mortis and his partner Wrath trying to steal that item, but of course, like a lot of things in WCW, it was all dropped and forgotten about. Some would say it was for the best though. The whole Blood Runs Code thing was of course inspired by Mortal Kombat, and there's a lot to make fun of within that angle, but I think the best thing to come out of all of it was Mortis. Some will disagree, I know, but I just really liked how the character looked, and when you mix this in with the in-ring skills of Kanyon, I think it's a winning formula that could have been a whole lot more. I truly think the Mortis character could have worked much better in WWF. It was inspired by a video game, and it was focusing on something popular outside of wrestling, but Mortis was still cool. Cooler than Glacier anyway. While many today see Steve Regal as an innovator and one of the guys responsible for bringing the catch-as-catch-can style to a more modern wrestling audience, there was always a risk of Regal's style in the 90s becoming, well, a bit boring to more casual fans. You have to remember the time period here. I remember saying that I didn't truly appreciate Steve Regal in WCW when I was younger, and a lot of people concurred, saying that Regal's one of those wrestlers you recognize a whole lot more when you're older and when you pay closer attention. Still though, to balance out his no-nonsense ring style, Regal developed the Lord Steven Regal character, a pompous blue blood who claimed he was a descendant of William the Conqueror. Lord Steven Regal would have so many traits tied up in his character. He was arrogant yet charming, annoying at times yet incredibly funny. He felt that being a man in the highest class of society back in the UK made him someone special in the United States, and it all makes for a great pro wrestling villain that many of us took for granted back in the 90s. The WWF did an excellent job of highlighting Regal's charm and his excellent use of facial expressions, but most of Regal's character work was holdovers from WCW, not including the real man's man stuff that just didn't suit Regal at all during his WWF debut. Lord Steven Regal's one of those gimmicks that on paper sounds pretty typical and basic, as in he's from another country and he thinks he's better than everyone in America, but Regal put his own twist on things inspired by comedy acts he watched in the UK, and what we got was one of my personal favourite gimmicks in WCW history. When it comes to Lance Storm, fans will point out his incredible in-ring abilities before they bring up his character traits. The WWE even poked fun at Lance's lack of character at one point, but go back to Lance Storm in WCW when he was ridiculously pro-Canadian and you'll find the classic patriotic gimmick pushed to the absolute limit. Much like Lord Steven Regal, Lance was able to do something different with the evil foreigner character. Playing his country's national anthem before matches was nothing new, but collecting belts and slapping a maple leaf over them was definitely good stuff. Lance would also add in a dramatic pause when he said he was from Calgary. Alberta, Canada. And then you have something else that we tend to overlook. Lance's unwavering opinion that being from Calgary meant he was simply better than everyone else. And when I say unwavering, I really mean it. Lance expected everyone else to know that he was superior too. There was no questioning it. There was no whats, ifs, or buts. Lance would talk to the fans and the other wrestlers like they had the same mindset as he did, because everyone should just know this common knowledge that the best wrestlers come from Calgary, and that means everyone should treat Lance Storm with more respect. He was borderline delusional with his expectations, and it was all done with the straightest face possible. And when you add all this to an already great wrestler, you've got yourself a very entertaining but sadly overlooked performer in WCW. If you don't do anything else after watching this video, take some time out to watch Lance Storm in WCW. I think you'll enjoy it.
The following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
Some fans don't like to admit it, and some fans point out that the idea was inspired by another company, but it really doesn't matter. The NWO was a game changer. In terms of the faction's gimmick, we can only comfortably say that their main goal was to take over WCW. The stuff about these guys being WWF invaders has come into question due to executive producer Eric Bischoff stating that this was never the intention, although I really believe it was. But nevertheless, we can say the New World Order wanted to destroy WCW and the traditions of WCW. The NWO was like nothing fans of WCW and indeed the WWF had ever seen before. In the space of a few weeks, World Championship Wrestling went through culture shock and the company got turned upside down by a group of guys who refused to play by the rules. The group was like a poison that began spreading out around every corner of the organization, including the commentary tables and the production trucks. And soon enough, the New World Order became the hottest thing in professional wrestling and everyone paid attention. 1 week after Kevin Nash appeared on Nitro, WCW began their 83-week winning streak, and many would say the best days of the NWO happened within those 83 weeks, or at least during the first lot of months. Many fans would also say the NWO were victims of their own success, and the splinter groups and infighting made things much more difficult to watch week by week, but that doesn't take away from the initial impact the group made in World Championship Wrestling. They completely turned things around for WCW, and their initial success isn't up for debate at all. Still today, you'll find fans with NWO shirts on in arenas and you'll hear wrestlers say the words "too sweet," proving that the NWO was much more than just a gimmick and that the NWO left a legacy in the world of professional wrestling, whether you like that or not, I'm afraid. The Road Warriors began working together in Georgia back in 1983, and since then they've become possibly the most ripped off and copied tag team in the history of pro wrestling. Both guys worked a very high impact style, and when you mix in their unique look with the face paint and the ring attires, you end up with a tag team that turned a lot of heads and a team that people immediately took notice of. The gimmick was inspired by Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, which was released in 1981. Ole Anderson wanted Animal to be this Road Warrior, and Animal recalls having a bad time during his first stint in Georgia, but Anderson got the idea of creating a Road Warriors tag team, and Animal agreed. Hawk was brought in, and the rest is history. Hawk and Animal looked like absolute badasses. They looked intimidating and they backed it up in the ring. The phrase Road Warrior Pop was coined because audiences would lose their minds when Hawk and Animal entered the arena, and that just shows us how well these characters got over. Their look, their characters, their gimmicks inspired others, while some tag teams just completely ripped Hawk and Animal off. Companies would try to find the next Road Warriors and we'd end up getting mixed results. Some examples would be Demolition, the Powers of Pain, the Master Blasters, even the Ascension were seen as Road Warrior copycats by Road Warrior Animal himself. They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, so it just proves that the Road Warriors were very appealing in both look and ring style, right to the point of people blatantly trying to be just like Hawk and Animal. And that was 10 of my favourite WCW gimmicks. I'd be interested in hearing some of your favourite WCW characters in the comments, because really we tend to focus on the negatives sometimes, especially when it comes to World Championship Wrestling. I'm guilty of it too, of course, with the Blunder series and the Bad Gimmicks video I uploaded recently, but go on to Google and just search WCW Gimmicks. Almost every result will be something about ridiculous or dumb characters in WCW, so it'll be interesting to hear what others have to say in regards to gimmicks they enjoyed during the company's active years. There really isn't a wrong answer when it comes to your personal opinion. You may have liked Ernest the Cat Miller more than others, you could have been a big fan of the West Texas Rednecks, or maybe you like the Revolution stable. Let me know, and remember to explain why you like those characters and gimmicks. It'll be fun to read over your comments. Thanks again for watching, guys, I do appreciate it, and take care.